Ramona the Pest by Beverly Cleary. Chapter 1. Ramona's Great Day. I am not a pest, Ramona Quimby told her big sister Beezus. Then stop acting like a pest, said Beezus, whose real name was Beatrice. She was standing by the front window waiting for her friend Mary Jane to walk to school with her. I'm not acting like a pest, I'm just singing and skipping, said Ramona, who had only recently learned to skip with both feet. Ramona did not think she was a pest, no matter what others said. She never thought she was a pest. The people who called her a pest were always bigger, and so they could be unfair. Ramona went on with her singing and skipping. This is a great day, a great day, a great day, she sang. And to Ramona, who was feeling grown up in a dress instead of play clothes, this was a great day. The greatest day of her whole life. No longer would she have to sit on her tricycle watching Beezus and Henry Huggins and the rest of the boys and girls in the neighborhood go off to school. Today she was going to school too. Today she was going to learn to read and write and do all the things that would help her catch up with Beezus. Come on, Mama, urged Ramona, pausing in her singing and skipping. We don't want to be late for school. Don't pester, Ramona, said Mrs. Quimby. I'll get you there in plenty of time. I'm not pestering, protested Ramona, who never meant to pester. She was not a slowpoke grown-up. She was a girl who could not wait. Life was so interesting, she had to find out what happened next. Then Mary Jane arrived. Mrs. Quimby, would it be all right if Beezus and I take Ramona to kindergarten? She asked. No, said Ramona instantly. Mary Jane was one of those girls who always wanted to pretend she was a mother, and who always wanted Ramona to be the baby. Nobody was going to catch Ramona being a baby on her first day of school. Why not? Mrs. Quimby asked Ramona. You could walk to school with Beezus and Mary Jane just like a big girl. No, I couldn't. Ramona was not fooled for an instant. Mary Jane would talk in that silly voice she used when she was being a mother and take her by the hand and help her across the street. And everyone would think she was really a baby. Please, Ramona, coaxed Beezus. It would be lots of fun to take you in and introduce you to the kindergarten teacher. No, said Ramona, and stamped her foot. Beezus and Mary Jane might have fun, but she wouldn't. Nobody but a genuine grown-up was going to take her to school. If she had to, she would make a great big noisy fuss, and when Ramona made a great big noisy fuss, she usually got her own way. Great big noisy fusses were often necessary when a girl was the youngest member of the family and the youngest person on her block. All right, Ramona, said Mrs. Quimby, don't make a great big noisy fuss. If that's the way you feel about it, you don't have to walk with the girls. I'll take you. Hurry, Mama, said Ramona happily as she watched Beezus and Mary Jane go out the door. But when Ramona finally got her mother out of the house, she was disappointed to see one of her mother's friends, Mrs. Kemp, approaching with her son Howie and his little sister Willa Jean, who was riding in a stroller. Hurry, Mama, urged Ramona, not wanting to wait for the Kemps. Because their mothers were friends, she and Howie were expected to get along with one another. Hi there, Mrs. Kemp called out, so of course Ramona's mother had to wait. Howie stared at Ramona. He did not like having to get along with her, any more than she liked having to get along with him. Ramona stared back. Howie was a solid-looking boy with curly blonde hair. Such a waste on a boy, his mother often remarked. The legs of his new jeans were turned up, and he was wearing a new shirt with long sleeves. He did not look the least bit excited about starting kindergarten. That was the trouble with Howie, Ramona felt. He never got excited. Straight-haired Willa Jean, who was interesting to Ramona because she was so sloppy, blew out a mouthful of wet Zwieback crumbs and laughed at her cleverness. Today my baby leaves me, remarked Mrs. Quimby with a smile. And as the little group proceeded down Klickitat Street toward Glenwood School, Ramona, who enjoyed being her mother's baby, did not enjoy being called her mother's baby, especially in front of Howie. They grow up so quickly, observed Mrs. Kemp. Ramona could not understand why grown-ups always talked about how quickly children grew up. Ramona thought growing up was the slowest thing there was, slower than waiting for Christmas to come. She had been waiting years just to get to kindergarten, and the last half hour was the slowest part of all. When the group reached the intersection nearest Glenwood School, Ramona was pleased to see that Beezus' friend Henry Huggins was the traffic boy in charge of that particular corner. After Henry had led them across the street, Ramona ran off toward the kindergarten, which was a temporary wooden building with its own playground. Mothers and children were already entering the open door. Some of the children looked frightened. One girl was crying. "We're late," cried Ramona. "Hurry." Howie was not a boy to be hurried. "I don't see any tricycles," he said critically. "I don't see any dirt to dig in." Ramona was scornful. "This isn't nursery school. Tricycles and dirt are for nursery school." Her own tricycle was hidden in the garage because it was too babyish for her now that she was going to school. Some big first-grade boys ran past yelling, "Kindergarten babies, kindergarten babies." "We are not babies," Ramona yelled back, and she led her mother into the kindergarten. Once inside, she stayed close to her. Everything was so strange, and there was so much to see. The little tables and chairs, the rows of cupboards, each with a different picture on the door, the play stove, and the wooden blocks big enough to stand on. The teacher, who was new to Glenwood School, turned out to be so young and pretty she could not have been a grown-up very long. It was rumored that she had never taught school before. "Hello, Ramona. My name is Miss Binny," she said, speaking each syllable distinctly, as she pinned Ramona's name to her dress. "I am so glad you've come to kindergarten." Then she took Ramona by the hand and led her to one of the little tables and chairs. "Sit here for the present," she said with a smile. A present, thought Ramona, and knew at once she was going to like Miss Binny. "Goodbye, Ramona," said Mrs. Quimby. "Be a good girl." As she watched her mother walk out the door, Ramona decided school was going to be even better than she had hoped. Nobody had told her she was going to get a present the very first day. What kind of present could it be, she wondered, trying to remember if Beezus had ever been given a present by her teacher. Ramona listened carefully while Miss Binny showed Howie to a table, but all her teacher said was, "Howie, I would like you to sit here." Well, thought Ramona, not everyone is going to get a present, so Miss Binny must like me best. Ramona watched and listened as the other boys and girls arrived, but Miss Binny did not tell anyone else he was going to get a present if he sat in a certain chair. Ramona wondered if her present would be wrapped in fancy paper and tied with a ribbon like a birthday present. She hoped so. As Ramona sat waiting for her present, she watched the other children being introduced to Miss Binny by their mothers. She found two members of the morning kindergarten especially interesting. One was a boy named Davy, who was small, thin, and eager. He was the only boy in the class in short pants, and Ramona liked him at once. She liked him so much, she decided she would kiss him. The other interesting person was a big girl named Susan. Susan's hair looked like the hair on the girls in the pictures of the old-fashioned stories Beezus liked to read. It was reddish-brown and hung in curls like springs that touched her shoulders and bounced when she walked. Ramona had never seen such curls before. All the curly-haired girls she knew wore their hair short. Ramona put her hand to her own short, straight hair, which was ordinary brown, and longed to touch that springy, bright hair. She longed to stretch one of those curls and watch it spring back. Boing, thought Ramona, making a mental noise like a spring on a television cartoon, and wishing for thick, springy, boing-boing hair like Susan's. Howie interrupted Ramona's admiration of Susan's hair. "How soon do you think we get to go out and play?" he asked. "Maybe after Miss Binny gives me my present," Ramona answered. "She said she was going to give me one." "How come she's going to give you a present?" Howie wanted to know. "She didn't say anything about giving me a present." "Maybe she likes me best," said Ramona. This news did not make Howie happy. He turned to the next boy and said, "She's going to get a present." Ramona wondered how long she would have to sit there to get the present. If only Miss Binny understood how hard waiting was for her. When the last child had been welcomed and the last tearful mother had departed, Miss Binny gave a little talk about the rules of the kindergarten and showed the class the door that led to the bathroom. Next, she assigned each person a little cupboard. Ramona's cupboard had a picture of a yellow duck on the door and Howie's of a green frog. Miss Binny explained that their hooks in the cloakroom were marked with the same pictures. Then she asked the class to follow her quietly into the cloakroom to find their hooks. Difficult though waiting was for her, Ramona did not budge. Miss Binny had not told her to get up and go into the cloakroom for her present. She had told her to sit for her present, and Ramona was going to sit until she got it. She would sit as if she were glued to the chair. Howie scowled at Ramona as he returned from the cloakroom and said to another boy, "The teacher is going to give her a present." Naturally, the boy wanted to know why. "I don't know," admitted Ramona. "She told me if I sat here I would get a present. I guess she likes me best." By the time Miss Binny returned from the cloakroom, word had spread around the classroom that Ramona was going to get a present. Next, Miss Binny taught the class words of a puzzling song about the Donzer Lee light, which Ramona did not understand because she did not know what a donzer was. "Oh, say can you see by the Donzer Lee light," sang Miss Binny, and Ramona decided that a donzer was another word for a lamp. When Miss Binny had gone over the song several times, she asked the class to stand and sing it with her. Ramona did not budge, neither did Howie and some of the others, and Ramona knew that they were hoping for presents too. Copycats, she thought. "Stand up straight like good Americans," said Miss Binny, so firmly that Howie and the others reluctantly stood up. Ramona decided that she would have to be a good American sitting down. "Ramona," said Miss Binny, "aren't you going to stand with the rest of us?" Ramona thought quickly. Maybe the question was some kind of test, like a test in a fairy tale. Maybe Miss Binny was testing her to see if she could get her out of her seat. If she failed the test, she would not get the present. "I can't," said Ramona. Miss Binny looked puzzled, but she did not insist that Ramona stand while she led the class through the Donzer song. Ramona sang along with the others and hoped that her present came next. But when the song ended, Miss Binny made no mention of the present. Instead, she picked up a book. Ramona decided that at last the time had come to learn to read. Miss Binny stood in front of her class and began to read aloud from Mike Mulligan and His Steam Shovel, a book that was a favorite of Ramona's because, unlike so many books for her age, it was neither quiet and sleepy nor sweet and pretty. Ramona, pretending she was glued to her chair, enjoyed hearing the story again and listened quietly with the rest of the kindergarten to the story of Mike Mulligan's old-fashioned steam shovel, which proved its worth by digging the basement for the new town hall of Poppersville in a single day, beginning at dawn and ending as the sun went down. As Ramona listened, a question came into her mind, a question that had often puzzled her about the books that were read to her. Somehow, books always left out one of the most important things anyone would want to know. Now that Ramona was in school, and school was a place for learning, perhaps Miss Binny could answer the question. Ramona waited quietly until her teacher had finished the story, and then she raised her hand the way Miss Binny had told the class they should raise their hands when they wanted to speak in school. Joey, who did not remember to raise his hand, spoke out. "That's a good book." Miss Binny smiled at Ramona and said, "I like the way Ramona remembers to raise her hand when she has something to say. Yes, Ramona?" Ramona's hopes soared. Her teacher had smiled at her. "Miss Binny, I want to know, how did Mike Mulligan go to the bathroom when he was digging the basement of the town hall?" Miss Binny's smile seemed to last longer than smiles usually last. Ramona glanced uneasily around and saw that others were waiting with interest for the answer. Everybody wanted to know how Mike Mulligan went to the bathroom. "Well," said Miss Binny at last, "I don't really know, Ramona. The book doesn't tell us." I always wanted to know too, said Howie, without raising his hand. And others murmured in agreement. The whole class, it seemed, had been wondering how Mike Mulligan went to the bathroom. Maybe he stopped the steam shovel and climbed out of the hole he was digging and went to a service station, suggested a boy named Eric. He couldn't. The book said he had to work as fast as he could all day, Howie pointed out. It doesn't say he stopped. Miss Binney faced the 29 earnest members of the kindergarten, all of whom wanted to know how Mike Mulligan went to the bathroom. Boys and girls, she began, and spoke in her clear, distinct way. The reason the book does not tell us how Mike Mulligan went to the bathroom is that it is not an important part of the story. The story is about digging the basement of the town hall, and that is what the book tells us. Miss Binney spoke as if this explanation ended the matter, but the kindergarten was not convinced. Ramona knew, and the rest of the class knew, that knowing how to go to the bathroom was important. They were surprised that Miss Binney did not understand, because she had showed them the bathroom the very first thing. Ramona could see that there were going to be some things she was not going to learn in school, and along with the rest of the class she stared reproachfully at Miss Binney. The teacher looked embarrassed, as if she knew she had disappointed her kindergarten. She recovered quickly, closed the book, and told the class that if they would walk quietly out to the playground, she would teach them a game called Gray Duck. Ramona did not budge. She watched the rest of the class leave the room and admired Susan's boing-boing curls as they bounced about her shoulders. But she did not stir from her seat. Only Miss Binney could unstick the imaginary glue that held her there. "Don't you want to learn to play Gray Duck, Ramona?" Miss Binney asked. Ramona nodded. "Yes, but I can't." "Why not?" asked Miss Binney. "I can't leave my seat," said Ramona. When Miss Binney looked blank, she added, "Because of the present." "What present?" Miss Binney seemed so genuinely puzzled that Ramona became uneasy. The teacher sat down in the little chair next to Ramona's and said, "Tell me why you can't play Gray Duck." Ramona squirmed, worn out with waiting. She had an uneasy feeling that something had gone wrong someplace. "I want to play Gray Duck, but you—" She stopped, feeling that she might be about to say the wrong thing. "But I what?" asked Miss Binney. "Well, you said if I sat here I would get a present," said Ramona at last. "But you didn't say how long I had to sit here." If Miss Binney had looked puzzled before, she now looked baffled. "Ramona, I don't understand," she began. "Yes, you did," said Ramona, nodding. "You told me to sit here for the present, and I have been sitting here ever since school started, and you haven't given me a present." Miss Binney's face turned red, and she looked so embarrassed that Ramona felt completely confused. Teachers were not supposed to look that way. Miss Binney spoke gently. "Ramona, I'm afraid we've had a misunderstanding." Ramona was blunt. "You mean I don't get a present?" "I'm afraid not," admitted Mrs. Binney. "You see, for the present means for now. I meant that I wanted you to sit here for now, because later I may have the children sit at different desks." "Oh." Ramona was so disappointed she had nothing to say. Words were so puzzling. Present should mean a present, just as a tack should mean to stick tacks in people. By now all the children were crowding around the door to see what had happened to their teacher. "I'm so sorry," said Miss Binney. "It's all my fault. I should have used different words." "That's all right," said Ramona, ashamed to have the class see that she was not going to get a present after all. "All right, class," said Miss Binney briskly. "Let's go outside and play Gray Duck. You too, Ramona." Gray Duck turned out to be an easy game, and Ramona's spirits recovered quickly from her disappointment. The class formed a circle, and the person who was it tagged someone who had to chase him around the circle. If it was caught before he got back to the empty place in the circle, he had to go into the center of the circle, which was called the mush pot, and the person who caught him became it. Ramona tried to stand next to the girl with the springy curls, but instead she found herself beside Howie. "I thought you were going to get a present," gloated Howie. Ramona merely scowled and made a face at Howie, who was it, but quickly landed in the mush pot because his new jeans were so stiff that they slowed him down. "Look at Howie in the mush pot," crowed Ramona. Howie looked as if he were about to cry, which Ramona thought was silly of him. Only a baby would cry in the mush pot. Me, somebody tag me," thought Ramona, jumping up and down. She longed for a turn to run around the circle. Susan was jumping up and down too. Her curls bobbed enticingly. At last Ramona felt a tap on her shoulder. Her turn had come to run around the circle. She ran as fast as she could to catch up with the sneakers pounding on the asphalt ahead of her. The boing boing curls were on the other side of the circle. Ramona was coming closer to them. She put out her hand. She took hold of a curl, a thick, springy curl. "Yow!" screamed the owner of the curls. Startled, Ramona let go. She was so surprised by the scream that she forgot to watch Susan's curls spring back. Susan clutched her curls with one hand and pointed at Ramona with the other. "That girl pulled my hair. Ow, ow, ow." Ramona felt that Susan did not have to be so touchy. She had not meant to hurt her. She only wanted to touch that beautiful springy hair that was so different from her own straight brown hair. "Ow, ow, ow," shrieked Susan, the center of everyone's attention. "Baby," said Ramona. "Ramona," said Miss Binny, "in our kindergarten we do not pull hair." "Susan doesn't have to be such a baby," said Ramona. "You may go sit on the bench outside the door while the rest of us play our game," Miss Binny told Ramona. Ramona did not want to go sit on any bench. She wanted to play gray duck with the rest of the class. "No," said Ramona, preparing to make a great big noisy fuss. "I won't." Susan stopped shrieking. A terrible silence fell over the playground. Everyone stared at Ramona in such a way that she almost felt as if she were beginning to shrink. Nothing like this had ever happened to her before. "Ramona," said Miss Binny quietly, "go sit on the bench." Without another word, Ramona walked across the playground and sat on the bench by the door of the kindergarten. The game of gray duck continued without her, but the class had not forgotten her. Howie grinned in her direction. Susan continued to look injured. Some laughed and pointed at Ramona. Others, particularly Davy, looked worried, as if they had not known such a terrible punishment could be given in kindergarten. Ramona swung her feet and pretended to be watching some workmen who were building a new market across the street. In spite of the misunderstanding about the present, she wanted so much to be loved by her pretty new teacher. Tears came into Ramona's eyes, but she would not cry. Nobody was ever going to call Ramona Quimby a crybaby. Never. Next door to the kindergarten, two little girls, about 2 and 4 years old, peered solemnly through the fence at Ramona. "See that girl?" said the older girl to her little sister. "She's sitting there because she's been bad." The 2-year-old looked awed to be in the presence of such wickedness. Ramona stared at the ground. She felt so ashamed. When the game ended, the class filed past Ramona into the kindergarten. "You may come in now, Ramona," said Miss Binny pleasantly. Ramona slid off the bench and followed the others. Even though she was not loved, she was forgiven, and that helped. She hoped that learning to read and write came next. Inside, Miss Binny announced that the time had come to rest. This news was another disappointment to Ramona, who felt that anyone who went to kindergarten was too old to rest. Miss Binny gave each child a mat on which there was a picture that matched the picture on his cupboard door and told him where to spread his mat on the floor. When all 29 children were lying down, they did not rest. They popped up to see what others were doing. They wiggled, they whispered, they coughed. They asked, "How much longer do we have to rest?" "Shh," said Miss Binny in a soft, quiet, sleepy voice. "The person who rests most quietly will get to be the wake-up fairy." "What's the wake-up fairy?" demanded Howie, bobbing up. "Shh, shh," whispered Miss Binny. The wake-up fairy tiptoes around and wakes up the class with the magic wand. Whoever is the fairy wakes up the quietest resters first. Ramona made up her mind that she would get to be the wake-up fairy, and then Miss Binny would know that she was not so bad after all. She lay flat on her back with her hands tight to her sides. The mat was thin and the floor was hard, but Ramona did not wiggle. She was sure she must be the best rester in the class, because she could hear others squirming around on their mats. Just to show Miss Binny she really and truly was resting, she gave one little snore, not a loud snore, but a delicate snore, to prove what a good rester she was. A scatter of giggles rose from the class, followed by several snores less delicate than Ramona's. They led to more and more, less and less delicate snores until everyone was snoring except a few who did not know how to snore. They were giggling. Miss Binny clapped her hands and spoke in a voice that was no longer soft, quiet, and sleepy. "All right, boys and girls," she said, "this is enough. We do not snore or giggle during rest time." "Ramona started it," said Howie. Ramona sat up and scowled at Howie. "Tattletale," she said in a voice of scorn. Across Howie she saw that Susan was lying quietly, with her beautiful curls spread out on her mat and her eyes screwed tight shut. "Well, you did," said Howie. "Children," Miss Binny's voice was sharp, "we must rest so that we will not be tired when our mothers come to take us home." "Is your mother coming to take you home?" Howie asked Miss Binny. Ramona had been wondering the same thing. "That's enough, Howie." Miss Binny spoke the way mothers sometimes speak just before dinner time. In a moment she was back to her soft, sleepy voice. "I like the way Susan is resting so quietly," she said. "Susan, you may be the wake-up fairy and tap the boys and girls with this wand to wake them up." The magic wand turned out to be nothing but an everyday yardstick. Ramona lay quietly, but her efforts were of no use. Susan, with her curls bouncing about her shoulders, tapped Ramona last. It's not fair, Ramona thought. She was not the worst rester in the class. Howie was much worse. The rest of the morning went quickly. The class was allowed to explore the paints and the toys, and those who wanted to were allowed to draw with their new crayons. They did not, however, learn to read and write. But Ramona cheered up when Miss Binny explained that anyone who had anything to share with the class could bring it to school the next day for show and tell. Ramona was glad when the bell finally rang and she saw her mother waiting for her outside the fence. Mrs. Kemp and Willa Jean were waiting for Howie too, and the five started home together. Right away, Howie said, "Ramona got benched and she's the worst rester in the class." After all that had happened that morning, Ramona found this too much. "Why don't you shut up?" she yelled at Howie just before she hit him. Mrs. Quimby seized Ramona by the hand and dragged her away from Howie. "Now, Ramona," she said, and her voice was firm, "this is no way to behave on your first day of school." "Poor little girl," said Mrs. Kemp. "She's worn out." Nothing infuriated Ramona more than having a grown-up say, as if she could not hear her, that she was worn out. "I am not worn out," she shrieked. "She got plenty of rest while she was benched," said Howie. "Now, Howie, you stay out of this," said Mrs. Kemp. Then, to change the subject, she asked her son, "How do you like kindergarten?" "Oh, I guess it's all right," said Howie without enthusiasm. "They don't have any dirt to dig in or tricycles to ride." "And what about you, Ramona?" said Mrs. Quimby. "Did you like kindergarten?" Ramona considered. Kindergarten had not turned out as she had expected. Still, even though she had not been given a present, and Miss Binny did not love her, she had liked being with boys and girls her own age. She liked singing the song about the Donzer and having her own little cupboard. "I didn't like it as much as I thought I would," she answered honestly. "But maybe it will get better when we have show and tell." Chapter 2, Show and Tell. Ramona looked forward to many things. Her first loose tooth, riding a bicycle instead of a tricycle, wearing lipstick like her mother. But most of all, she looked forward to show and tell. For years, Ramona had watched her sister Beezus leave for school with a doll, a book, or a pretty leaf to share with her class. She had watched Beezus's friend, Henry Huggins, carry mysterious, lumpy packages past her house on his way to school. She had listened to Beezus talk about the interesting things her class brought to school: turtles, ballpoint pens that wrote in 3 different colors, a live clam in a jar of sand and seawater. Now at last the time came for Ramona to show and tell. "But what are you going to take to show your class?" she asked Beezus, hoping for an idea for herself. "Nothing," said Beezus, and she went on to explain. "Along about the 3rd grade, you begin to outgrow show and tell. By the 5th grade, it's all right to take something really unusual, like somebody's pickled appendix or something to do with social studies. An old piece of fur when you study fur traders would be all right. Or if something really exciting happened, like your house burning down, it would be all right to tell about that. But in the 5th grade, you don't take an old doll or a toy fire engine to school, and you don't call it show and tell by then. You just let the teacher know you have something interesting." Ramona was not discouraged. She was used to Beezus's growing out of things as she grew into them. She rummaged around in her toy box and finally dragged out her favorite doll, the doll with the hair that could really be washed. "I'm going to take Chevrolet," she told Beezus. "Nobody names a doll Chevrolet," said Beezus, whose dolls had names like Sandra or Patty. "I do," Ramona answered. "I think Chevrolet is the most beautiful name in the world." "Well, she's a horrid-looking doll," said Beezus. "Her hair is green. Besides, you don't play with her." "I wash her hair," said Ramona loyally. "And the only reason what's left of her hair looks sort of green is that I tried to blue it like Howie's grandmother, who had her hair blued at the beauty shop. Mama said putting bluing on yellow hair turned it green. Anyway, I think it's pretty." Well, the time finally came to start to school. Ramona was disappointed once more to see Mrs. Kemp approaching with Howie and little Willa Jean. "Mama, come on," begged Ramona, dragging at her mother's hand, but her mother waited until the Kemps had caught up. Willa Jean was even sloppier in the morning. There were crumbs on the front of her sweater, and she was drinking apple juice out of a nursing bottle. Willa Jean dropped the bottle when she saw Chevrolet, and sat there with apple juice dribbling down her chin while she stared at Ramona's doll. "Ramona is taking her doll to school for show and tell," said Mrs. Quimby. Howie looked worried. "I don't have anything for show and tell," he said. "That's all right, Howie," said Mrs. Quimby. "Miss Binny doesn't expect you to take something every day." "I want to take something," said Howie. "My goodness, Howie," said his mother. "What if 29 children each brought something? Miss Binny wouldn't have time to teach you anything." "She's taking something," Howie pointed to Ramona. There was something familiar about the way Howie was behaving. Ramona pulled at her mother's hand. "Come on, Mama." "Ramona, I think it would be nice if you ran in the house and found something to lend Howie to take to school," said Mrs. Quimby. Ramona did not think this idea was nice at all, but she recognized that lending Howie something might be faster than arguing with him. She ran into the house, where she snatched up the first thing she saw, a stuffed rabbit that had already been given hard wear before the cat had adopted it as sort of a practice gopher. The cat liked to chew the rabbit's tail, carry it around in its mouth, or lie down and kick it with its hind feet. When Ramona thrust the rabbit into Howie's hand, Mrs. Kemp said, "Say thank you, Howie." "It's just an old beat-up bunny," said Howie scornfully. When his mother wasn't looking, he handed the rabbit to Willa Jean, who dropped her apple juice, seized the rabbit, and began to chew on its tail. Just like our cat, thought Ramona, as the group proceeded towards school. "Don't forget Ramona's bunny," said Mrs. Kemp when they reached the kindergarten playground. "I don't want her old bunny," said Howie. "Now, Howie," said his mother. "Ramona was kind enough to share her bunny, so you be nice." To Mrs. Quimby she said, as if Howie could not hear, "Howie needs to learn manners." "Share? Ramona had learned about sharing in nursery school, where she either had to share something of her own that she did not want to share, or she had to share something that belonged to someone else that she did not want to share either. "That's all right, Howie," she said. "You don't have to share my rabbit." Howie looked grateful, but his mother thrust the rabbit into his hands anyway. At the beginning, on that second day of kindergarten, Ramona felt shy because she was not sure what Miss Binney would think about a girl who had been made to sit on the bench. But Miss Binney smiled and said, "Good morning, Ramona," and seemed to have forgotten all about the day before. Ramona sat Chevrolet in her little cupboard with the duck on the door and waited for show and tell. "Did anyone bring something to show the class?" asked Miss Binney after the class had sung the Donzer song. Ramona remembered to raise her hand, and Miss Binney invited her to come to the front of the room to show the class what she had brought. Ramona took Chevrolet from her cupboard and stood beside Miss Binney's desk, where she discovered she did not know what to say. She looked to Miss Binney for help. Miss Binney smiled encouragingly. "Is there something you would like to tell us about your doll?" "I can really wash her hair," said Ramona. "It's sort of green because I gave her a blue rinse." "And what do you wash it with?" asked Miss Binney. "Lots of things," said Ramona, beginning to enjoy speaking in front of the class. "Soap, shampoo, detergent, bubble bath. I tried Dutch cleanser once, but it didn't work." "What is your doll's name?" asked Miss Binney. "Chevrolet," answered Ramona. "I named her after my aunt's car." The class began to laugh, especially the boys. Ramona felt confused, standing there in front of 28 boys and girls who were all laughing at her. "Well, I did," she said, angrily, almost tearfully. Chevrolet was a beautiful name, and there was no reason to laugh. Miss Binney ignored the giggles and snickers. "I think Chevrolet is a lovely name," she said. Then she repeated, "Chevrolet." The way Miss Binney pronounced the word made it sound like music. "Say it, class." "Chevrolet," said the class obediently, and this time no one laughed. Ramona's heart was filled with love for her teacher. Miss Binney was not like most grown-ups. Miss Binney understood. The teacher smiled at Ramona. "Thank you, Ramona, for sharing Chevrolet with us." After a girl showed her doll that talked when she pulled a cord on its back, and a boy told the class about his family's new refrigerator, Miss Binney asked, "Does anyone else have anything to show us or tell us about?" "That boy brought something," said Susan of the springy curls, pointing to Howie. Boing, thought Ramona, as she always did when those curls caught her attention. She was beginning to see that Susan was a girl who liked to take charge. "Howie, did you bring something?" asked Miss Binney. Howie looked embarrassed. "Come on, Howie," encouraged Miss Binney. "Show us what you brought." Reluctantly, Howie went to his cupboard and brought out the shabby blue rabbit with the damp tail. He carried it to Miss Binney's desk, faced the class, and said in a flat voice, "It's just an old bunny." The class showed very little interest. "Is there something you would like to tell us about your bunny?" said Miss Binney. "No," said Howie. "I just brought it because my mother made me." "I can tell you something about your bunny," said Miss Binney. "It's had lots of love. That's why it's so worn." Ramona was fascinated. In her imagination, she could see the cat lying on the carpet with the rabbit gripped in its teeth, while he battered it with his hind feet. The look that Howie gave the rabbit was somehow lacking in love. Ramona waited for him to say that it wasn't his rabbit, but he did not. He just stood there. Miss Binney, seeing that Howie could not be encouraged to speak in front of the class, opened a drawer in her desk, and as she reached inside, she said, "I have a present for your bunny." She pulled out a red ribbon, took the rabbit from Howie, and tied the ribbon around its neck in a bright bow. "There you are, Howie," she said, "a nice new bow for your bunny." Howie mumbled, "Thank you," as he quickly as possible hid the rabbit in his cupboard. Ramona was delighted. She felt that the red ribbon Miss Binney had given her old rabbit took place of the present she had not been given the day before. All morning she thought about the things she could do with that red ribbon. She could use it to tie up what was left of Chevrolet's hair. She could trade it to Beezus for something valuable, an empty perfume bottle, or some colored paper that wasn't scribbled on. During the rest time, Ramona had the best idea of all. She would save the ribbon until she got a 2-wheeled bicycle. Then she would weave it in and out of the spokes and ride so fast the ribbon would be a red blur as the wheels went around. Yes, that was exactly what she would do with her new red ribbon. When the noon bell rang, Mrs. Quimby, Mrs. Kemp, and little Willa Jean were waiting by the fence. "Howie," Mrs. Kemp called out, "don't forget Ramona's bunny." "Oh, that old thing," muttered Howie. But he returned to his cupboard while Ramona walked along behind the mothers. "Howie needs to learn responsibility," Mrs. Kemp was saying. When Howie had caught up, he untied the ribbon and shoved the rabbit at Ramona. "Here, take your old rabbit," he said. Ramona took it and said, "Give me my ribbon." "It's not your ribbon," said Howie, "it's my ribbon." The two mothers were so busy talking about their children needing to learn responsibility, they paid no attention to the argument. "It is not," said Ramona, "it's my ribbon. Miss Binny gave it to me." Howie was so calm and so sure that he was right that Ramona was infuriated. She grabbed for the ribbon, but Howie held it away from her. "Miss Binny tied it around my rabbit's neck, so it's my ribbon," she said, her voice rising. "No," said Howie flatly and calmly. "Ribbons aren't for boys," Ramona reminded him. "Now give it to me." "It isn't yours." Howie showed no excitement, only stubbornness. Howie's behavior drove Ramona wild. She wanted him to get excited. She wanted him to get angry. "It is too mine," she shrieked, and at last the mothers turned around. "What's going on?" asked Mrs. Quimby. "Howie has my ribbon and won't give it back," said Ramona, so angry she was near tears. "It isn't hers," said Howie. The two mothers exchanged glances. "Howie, where did you get that ribbon?" asked Mrs. Kemp. "Miss Binny gave it to me," said Howie. "She gave it to me," corrected Ramona, and she fought back tears. "She tied it on my rabbit's neck, so it's my ribbon." Anybody should be able to understand that. Anybody who was not stupid. Howie considered this question. "Now, Howie," said his mother, "what does a big boy like you want with a ribbon?" Howie considered this question as if his mother really expected an answer. "Well, I could tie it on the tail of a kite if I had a kite." "He just doesn't want me to have it," explained Ramona. "He's selfish." "I am not selfish," said Howie. "You want something that doesn't belong to you." "I do not," yelled Ramona. "Now, Ramona," said her mother, "a piece of ribbon isn't worth all this fuss. We have other ribbons at home that you can have." Ramona did not know how to make her mother understand. No other ribbon could possibly take the place of this one. Miss Binny had given her the ribbon, and she wanted it because she loved Miss Binny so much. She wished Miss Binny were here now because her teacher, unlike the mothers, would understand. All Ramona could say was, "It's mine." "I know," said Mrs. Kemp, as if a brilliant idea had just come to her. "You can share the ribbon." Ramona and Howie exchanged a look in which they agreed that nothing would be worse than sharing the ribbon. They both knew there were some things that could never be shared, and Miss Binny's ribbon was one of them. Ramona wanted that ribbon, and she wanted it all to herself. She knew that a grubby boy like Howie would probably let Willa Jean drool on it and ruin it. "That's a good idea," agreed Mrs. Quimby. "Ramona, you let Howie carry it halfway home, and then you carry it the rest of the way." "Then who gets it?" asked Howie, voicing the question that had risen in Ramona's thoughts. "We can cut it in two, so you each may have half," said Mrs. Kemp. "We're having lunch at Ramona's house, and as soon as we get there, we'll divide the ribbon." Miss Binny's beautiful ribbon chopped in two. This was too much. Ramona burst into tears. Her half would not be long enough for anything. If she ever got a 2-wheeled bicycle, there would not be enough ribbon to weave through the spokes of the wheel. There would not even be enough to tie up Chevrolet's hair. "I'm tired of sharing," said Howie. "Share, share, share. That's all grown-ups ever talk about." Ramona could not understand why both mothers were amused by Howie's words. She understood exactly what Howie meant, and she liked him a little better for saying so. She had always had a guilty feeling that she was the only person who felt that way. "Now, Howie, it isn't as bad as all that," said his mother. "It is too," said Howie, and Ramona nodded through her tears. "Give me the ribbon," said Mrs. Kemp. "Maybe after lunch we'll all feel better." Reluctantly, Howie surrendered the precious ribbon and said, "I suppose we're having tuna fish sandwiches again." "Howie, that's not polite," said his mother. At the Quimby's house, Ramona's mother said, "Why don't you and Howie play with your tricycle while I prepare lunch?" "Sure, Ramona," said Howie, as the two mothers boosted Willa Jean's stroller up the stairs, and he and Ramona were left together, whether they wanted to be or not. Ramona sat down on the steps and tried to think of a name to call Howie. Pie Face wasn't bad enough. If she used some of the names she had heard the big boys use at school, her mother would come out and scold her. Perhaps Little Booby Boy would do. "Where's your trike?" asked Howie. "In the garage," answered Ramona. "I don't ride it anymore now that I'm in kindergarten." "How come?" asked Howie. "I'm too big," said Ramona. "Everyone else on the block rides two-wheelers. Only babies ride tricycles." She made this remark because she knew Howie still rode his tricycle, and she was so angry about the ribbon she wanted to hurt his feelings. If Howie's feelings were hurt, he did not show it. He seemed to be considering Ramona's remarks in his usual deliberate way. "I could take off one of the wheels if I had pliers and a screwdriver," he said at last. Ramona was indignant. "And wreck my tricycle?" Howie just wanted to get her into trouble. "It wouldn't wreck it," said Howie. "I take the wheels off my tricycle all the time. You can ride on the front wheel and one back wheel. That way you'd have a two-wheeler." Ramona was not convinced. "Come on, Ramona," coaxed Howie. "I like to take the wheels off tricycles." Ramona considered. "If I let you take off a wheel, do I get to keep the ribbon?" "Well, I guess so." After all, Howie was a boy. He was more interested in taking a tricycle apart than he was in playing with any ribbon. Ramona was doubtful about Howie's ability to turn her tricycle into a two-wheeler, but she was determined to save Miss Binny's red ribbon. She trundled her tricycle out of the garage. Then she found the pliers and a screwdriver and handed them to Howie, who went to work in a businesslike way. He used the screwdriver to pry off the hub. With the pliers, he straightened the cotter pin that held the wheel in place and removed it from the axle, and pulled the axle off the wheel. Next, he returned the cotter pin to its hole in the axle and bent the ends once more so that the axle would stay in place. "There," he said with satisfaction. For once he looked happy and sure of himself. You have to sort of lean to one side when you ride it. Ramona was so impressed by Howie's work that her anger began to drain away. Maybe Howie was right. She grasped her tricycle by the handlebars and mounted the seat. By leaning toward the side on which the wheel had been removed, she managed to balance herself and to ride down the driveway in an uncertain and lopsided fashion. "Hey, it works," she called out, and when she reached the sidewalk, she circled and pedaled back toward Howie, who stood beaming at the success of his alteration. "I told you it would work," he bragged. "I didn't believe you at first," confessed Ramona, who would never again be seen riding a babyish three-wheeler. The back door opened and Mrs. Quimby called out, "Come on, children. Your tuna sandwiches are ready." "See my two-wheeler?" cried Ramona, pedaling in a lopsided circle. "Well, aren't you a big girl?" exclaimed her mother. "How did you ever manage to do that?" Ramona came to a halt. "Howie fixed my trike for me and told me how to ride it." "What a clever boy," said Mrs. Quimby. "You must be very good with tools." Howie beamed with pleasure at this compliment. "And Mama," said Ramona, "Howie says I can have Miss Binny's ribbon." "Sure," agreed Howie. "What do I want with an old ribbon?" "I'm going to weave it in and out of the front spokes of my two-wheeler and ride so fast it will make a blur," said Ramona. "Come on, Howie, let's go eat our tuna fish sandwiches." Chapter 3. Seat Work. There were two kinds of children who went to kindergarten: those who lined up beside the door before school, as they were supposed to, and those who ran around the playground and scrambled to get in line when they saw Miss Binny approaching. Ramona ran around the playground. One morning, as Ramona was running around the playground, she noticed Davy waiting for Henry Huggins to lead him across the intersection. She was interested to see that Davy was wearing a black cape pinned to his shoulders with 2 big safety pins. While Henry held up 2 cars and a cement truck, Ramona watched Davy crossing the street. The more Ramona saw of Davy, the better she liked him. He was such a nice, shy boy with blue eyes and soft brown hair. Ramona always tried to choose Davy for her partner in folk dancing. And when the class played Grey Duck, Ramona always tagged Davy unless he was already in the mush pot. When Davy arrived, Ramona marched up to him and asked, "Are you Batman?" "No," said Davy. "Are you Superman?" asked Ramona. "No," said Davy. Who else could Davy be in a black cape? Ramona stopped and thought, but was unable to think of anyone else who wore a cape. "Well, who are you?" she asked at last. "Mighty Mouse," crowed Davy, delighted that he had baffled Ramona. "I'm going to kiss you, Mighty Mouse," shrieked Ramona. Davy began to run, and Ramona ran after him. Round and round the playground, they ran with Davy's cape flying out behind him. Under the traveling bars and around the jungle gym, she chased him. "Run, Davy, run!" screamed the rest of the class, jumping up and down, until Miss Binny was seen approaching and everyone scrambled to get in line. Every morning afterward, when Ramona reached the playground, she tried to catch Davy so she could kiss him. "Here comes Ramona," the other boys and girls shouted when they saw Ramona walking down the street. "Run, Davy, run!" And Davy ran with Ramona after him. Round and round the playground they ran while the class cheered Davy on. "That kid ought to go out for track when he gets a little older," Ramona heard one of the workmen across the street say one day. Once Ramona came near enough to grab Davy's clothes, but he jerked away, popping the buttons off his shirt. For once Davy stopped running. "Now see what you did," he accused. "My mother is going to be mad at you." Ramona stopped in her tracks. "I didn't do anything," she said indignantly. "I just hung on. You did the pulling." "Here comes Miss Binny," someone called out, and Ramona and Davy scurried to get in line by the door. After that, Davy stayed farther away from Ramona than ever, which made Ramona sad, because Davy was such a nice boy, and she did so long to kiss him. However, Ramona was not so sad that she stopped chasing Davy. Round and round they went every morning until Miss Binny arrived. Miss Binny, by this time, had begun to teach her class something more than games, the rules of kindergarten and the mysterious Donzer song. Ramona thought of kindergarten as being divided into 2 parts. The first part was the running part, which included games, dancing, finger painting, and playing. The second part was called seat work. Seat work was serious. Everyone was expected to work quietly in his own seat without disturbing anyone else. Ramona found it difficult to sit still because she was always interested in what everyone else was doing. "Ramona, keep your eyes on your work," Miss Binny said, and sometimes Ramona remembered. For the first seat work assignment, each member of the class was told to draw a picture of his own house. Ramona, who had expected to learn to read and write in school like her sister Beezus, used her new crayons quickly to draw her house, with 2 windows, a door, and a red chimney. With her green crayon, she scrubbed in some shrubbery. Anyone familiar with her neighborhood could tell the picture was of her house. But somehow Ramona was not satisfied. She looked around to see what others were doing. Susan had drawn a picture of her house and was adding a girl with boing boing curls looking out the window. Howie, who had drawn his house with the garage door open and a car inside, was adding a motorcycle parked at the curb. Davy's house looked like a clubhouse built by some boys who had a few old boards and not enough nails. It leaned to one side in a tired sort of way. Ramona studied her own drawing and decided she would have to do something to make it more interesting. After considering various colors of crayon, she selected the black and drew big black swirls coming from the windows. "You aren't supposed to scribble on your picture," said Howie, who was also inclined to pay attention to other people's work. Ramona was indignant. "I didn't scribble. The black is part of my picture." When Miss Binney asked the class to set their pictures on the chalk rail so that everyone might see them, the class noticed Ramona's picture at once, because it was drawn with bold, heavy strokes and because of the black swirls. "Miss Binney, Ramona scribbled all over her house," said Susan, who by now had revealed herself as the kind of girl who always wanted to play house, so she could be the mother and boss everybody. "I did not," protested Ramona, beginning to see that her picture was going to be misunderstood by everyone. Maybe she had been wrong to try and make it interesting. Maybe Miss Binney did not want interesting pictures. "You did too." Joey ran up to the chalk rail and pointed to Ramona's black swirls. "See?" The class, including Ramona, waited for Miss Binney to say Ramona should not scribble on her picture, but Miss Binney merely smiled and said, "Remember your seat, Joey. Ramona, suppose you tell us about your picture." "I didn't scribble on it," said Ramona. "Of course you didn't," Miss Binney said. Ramona loved her teacher even more. "Well," she began, "that black isn't scribbling, it's smoke coming out of the windows." "And why is smoke coming out of the windows?" gently pressed Miss Binney. "Because there's a fire in the fireplace and the chimney is stopped up," explained Ramona. "It's stopped up with Santa Claus, but he doesn't show in the picture." Ramona smiled shyly at her teacher. "I wanted to make my picture interesting." Miss Binney returned her smile, "And you did make it interesting." Davy looked worried. "How does Santa Claus get out?" he asked. "He doesn't stay in there, does he?" "Of course he gets out," said Ramona. "I just didn't show that part." The next day seat work got harder. Miss Binney said that everyone had to learn to print his name. Ramona saw right away that this business of names was not fair. When Miss Binney handed each member of the class a strip of cardboard with his name on it, anyone could see that a girl named Ramona was going to have to work harder than a girl named Anne or a boy named Joe. Not that Ramona minded having to work harder. She was eager to learn, to read and write. Having been the youngest member of her family and of the neighborhood, however, she had learned to watch for unfair situations. Carefully, Ramona printed R the way Miss Binney had printed it. A was easy. Even a baby could print A. Miss Binney said A was pointed like a witch's hat, and Ramona was planning to be a witch for the Halloween parade. O was also easy. It was a round balloon. Some people's O's looked like leaky balloons, but Ramona's O's were balloons full of air. "I like the way Ramona's O's are fat balloons full of air," Miss Binney said to the class, and Ramona's heart filled with joy. Miss Binney liked her O's best. Miss Binney walked around the classroom looking over shoulders. "That's right, boys and girls, nice pointed A's," she said. "A's with nice sharp peaks." "No, Davy, D faces the other way. Splendid, Karen. I like the way Karen's K has a nice straight back." Ramona wished she had a K in her name so that she could give it a nice straight back. Ramona enjoyed Miss Binney's descriptions of the letters of the alphabet and listened for them while she worked. In front of her, Susan played with a curl while she worked. She twisted it around her finger, stretched it out, and let it go. Boing, thought Ramona automatically. "Ramona, let's keep our eyes on our work," said Miss Binney. "No, Davy, D faces the other way." Once more, Ramona bent over her paper. The hardest part of her name, she soon discovered, was getting the right number of points on the M and N. Sometimes her name came out Ranoma, but before long she remembered that 2 points came first. "Good work, Ramona," said Miss Binney, the first time Ramona printed her name correctly. Ramona hugged herself with happiness and love for Miss Binney. Soon she was sure she would be able to join her letters together and write her name in the same rumply, grown-up way that Beezus wrote her name. Then Ramona discovered that some boys and girls had an extra letter followed by a dot. "Miss Binney, why don't I have a letter with a dot after it?" she asked. "Because we have only one Ramona," said Miss Binney. "We have 2 Erics, Eric Jones and Eric Ryan, We call them Eric J and Eric R because we don't want to get our Erics mixed up. Ramona did not like to miss anything. Could I have another letter with a little dot, she asked, knowing that Miss Binny would not think she was pestering. Miss Binny smiled and leaned over Ramona's table. Of course you may. This is the way to make Q, a nice round O with a little tail like a cat. And there is your little dot, which is called a period. Then Miss Binny walked on, supervising seat work. Ramona was charmed by her last initial. She drew a nice round O beside the one Miss Binny had drawn, and then she added a tail before she leaned back to admire her work. She had 1 balloon and 2 Halloween hats in her first name, and a cat in her last name. She doubted if anyone else in the morning kindergarten had such an interesting name. The next day at seat work time, Ramona practiced her cue while Miss Binny walked around helping those with S in their names. All the S's were having trouble. No, Susan, said Miss Binny. S stands up straight. It does not lie down as if it were a little worm crawling along the ground. Susan pulled out a curl and let it spring back. Boing, thought Ramona. My, how many S's we have that are crawling along like little worms, remarked Miss Binny. Ramona was pleased that she had escaped S. She drew another cue and admired it a moment before she added 2 little pointed ears, and then added 2 whiskers on each side so that her cue looked the way a cat looked when crouched on a rug in front of the fireplace. How pleased Miss Binny would be. Miss Binny would say to the kindergarten, "What a splendid cue Ramona has made. It looks exactly like a little cat." "No, Davy," Miss Binny was saying. "A D does not have 4 corners. It has 2 corners. One side is curved, like a robin redbreast." This conversation was so interesting that Ramona was curious to see Davy's D for herself. She waited until Miss Binny had moved away before she slipped out of her seat and over to the next table to look at Davy's D. It was a great disappointment. "That D doesn't look like a robin," she whispered. "It doesn't have any feathers. A robin has to have feathers." She watched robins pulling worms out on her front lawn many times. They all had feathers on their breasts, little soft feathers mussed by the wind. Davy studied his work, then he scrubbed out half his D with an eraser and drew it in a series of little jags. It did not look like Miss Binny's D, but it did look, in Ramona's opinion, more like the front of a robin with feathers mussed by the wind, which was what Miss Binny wanted, wasn't it? A D like a robin redbreast? "Good work, Davy," said Ramona, trying to sound like her teacher. Now maybe Davy would let her kiss him. "Ramona," said Miss Binny, "in your seat, please." She walked back to look at Davy's seat work. "No, Davy, didn't I tell you the curve of a D is as smooth as a robin redbreast? Yours is all jagged." Davy looked bewildered. "Those are feathers," he said. "Feathers like a robin." "Oh, I'm sorry, Davy. I didn't mean—" Miss Binny behaved as if she did not know quite what to say. "I didn't mean you to show each feather. I meant you to make it smooth and round. Ramona told me to do it this way," said Davy. "Ramona said a robin has to have feathers." "Ramona is not the kindergarten teacher." Miss Binny's voice, although not exactly cross, was not her usual gentle voice. "You make your D the way I showed you and never mind what Ramona says." Ramona felt confused. Things had such an expected way of turning out all wrong. Miss Binny said a D should look like a robin redbreast, didn't she? And robins had feathers, didn't they? So why wasn't putting feathers on a D all right? Davy glared at Ramona as he took his eraser and scrubbed out half his D a second time. He scrubbed so hard he rumpled his paper. "Now see what you did," he said. Ramona felt terrible. Dear little Davy, whom she loved so much, was angry with her. And now he would run faster than ever. She never would get to kiss him. And even worse, Miss Binny did not like D's with feathers, so she probably would not like Q's with ears and whiskers either. Hoping her teacher would not see what she was doing, Ramona quickly and regretfully erased the ears and whiskers from her cue. How plain and bare it looked with only its tail left to keep it from being an O. Miss Binny, who could understand that Santa Claus in the chimney would make a fireplace smoke, might be disappointed if she knew Ramona had given her cue ears and whiskers, because lettering was different from drawing pictures. Ramona loved Miss Binny so much she did not want to disappoint her, not ever. Miss Binny was the nicest teacher in the whole world. Chapter 4. The Substitute. Before long, Mrs. Quimby and Mrs. Kemp decided the time had come for Ramona and Howie to walk to school by themselves. Mrs. Kemp, pushing Willa Jean in her stroller, walked Howie to the Quimby's house, where Ramona's mother invited her in for a cup of coffee. "You better put all your stuff away," Howie advised Ramona, as his mother lifted his little sister out of the stroller. Willa Jean crawls around and chews things. Grateful for this advice, Ramona closed the door of her room. "Now, Howie, you be sure to look both ways before you cross the street," cautioned his mother. "You too, Ramona," said Mrs. Quimby. "And walk on the sidewalk. Don't go running out into the street." "And cross between the white lines," said Mrs. Kemp. "And wait for the traffic boy near the school," said Mrs. Quimby. "And don't talk to strangers," said Mrs. Kemp. Howie and Ramona, weighed down by the responsibility of walking themselves to school, trudged off down the street. Howie was even gloomier than usual, because he was the only boy in the morning kindergarten who wore jeans with only one hip pocket. All the other boys had 2 hip pockets. "That's silly," said Ramona, still inclined to be impatient with Howie. If Howie did not like his jeans, why didn't he just make a great big noisy fuss about them? "No, it isn't," contradicted Howie. "Jeans with 1 hip pocket are babyish." At the cross street, Ramona and Howie stopped and looked both ways. They saw a car coming a block away, so they waited. They waited and waited. When the car finally passed, they saw another car coming a block away in the opposite direction. They waited some more. At last the coast was clear, and they walked, stiff-legged in their haste, across the street. "Ooh," said Howie, relieved that they were safely across. The next intersection was easier because Henry Huggins, in his red traffic sweater and yellow cap, was the traffic boy on duty. Ramona was not awed by Henry, even though he often got to hold up cement and lumber trucks delivering material for the market that was being built across from the school. She had known Henry and his dog Ribsy as long as she could remember, and she admired Henry, because not only was he a traffic boy, he also delivered papers. Now Ramona looked at Henry, who was standing with his feet apart and his hands clasped behind his back. Ribsy was sitting beside him as if he were watching traffic too. Just to see what Henry would do, Ramona stepped off the curb. "You get back on that curb, Ramona," Henry ordered above the noise of the construction on the corner. Ramona set 1 foot back on the curb. "All the way, Ramona," said Henry. Ramona stood with both heels on the curb, but her toes over the gutter. Henry could not say she was not standing on the curb, so he merely glared. When several boys and girls were waiting to cross the street, Henry marched across with Ribsy, prancing along beside him. "Beat it, Ribsy," said Henry between his teeth. Ribsy paid no attention. Directly in front of Ramona, Henry executed a sharp about-face like a real soldier. Ramona marched behind Henry, stepping as close to his sneakers as she could. The other children laughed. On the opposite curb, Henry tried to execute another military about-face, but instead he tripped over Ramona. "Doggone you, Ramona," he said angrily. "If you don't cut that out, I'm going to report you." "Nobody reports kindergartners," scoffed an older boy. "Well, I'm going to report Ramona if she doesn't cut it out," said Henry. Obviously, Henry felt it was his bad luck that he had to guard an intersection where Ramona crossed the street. Between crossing the street without a grown-up and getting so much attention from Henry, Ramona felt that her day was off to a good start. However, as she and Howie approached the kindergarten building, she saw at once that something was wrong. The door to the kindergarten was already open. No one was playing on the jungle gym. No one was running around the playground. No one was even waiting in line by the door. Instead, the boys and girls were huddled in groups like frightened mice. They all looked worried, and once in a while someone who appeared to be acting brave would run to the open door, peer inside, and come running back to one of the groups to report something. "What's the matter?" asked Ramona. "Miss Binny isn't there," whispered Susan. "It's a different lady." "A substitute," said Eric R. Miss Binny not there. Susan must be wrong. Miss Binny had to be there. Kindergarten would not be kindergarten without Miss Binny. Ramona ran to the door to see for herself. Susan was right. Miss Binny was not there. The woman who was busy at Miss Binny's desk was taller and older. She was as old as a mother. Her dress was brown and her shoes were sensible. Ramona did not like what she saw at all, so she ran back to a cluster of boys and girls. "What are we going to do?" she asked, feeling as if she had been deserted by Miss Binny. For her teacher to go home and not come back was not right. "I think I'll go home," said Susan. Ramona thought this idea was babyish of Susan. She had seen what happened to boys and girls who ran home from kindergarten. Their mothers marched them right straight back again. That's what happened. No, going home would not do. "I bet the substitute won't even know the rules of our kindergarten," said Howie. The children agreed. Miss Binny said following the rules of their kindergarten was important. How could this stranger know what the rules were? A stranger would not even know the names of the boys and girls. She might get them mixed up. Still feeling that Miss Binny was disloyal to stay away from school, Ramona made up her mind that she was not going into that kindergarten room with that strange teacher. Nobody could make her go in there. But where would she go? She could not go home because her mother would march her back. She could not go into the main building of the Glenwood School because everyone would know a girl her size belonged out in the kindergarten. She had to hide, but where? When the first bell rang, Ramona knew she did not have much time. There was no place to hide on the kindergarten playground, so she slipped around behind the little building and joined the boys and girls who were streaming into the red brick building. "Kindergarten baby," a first grader shouted at Ramona. "Pie face," answered Ramona with spirit. She could see only two places to hide: behind the bicycle racks or behind a row of trash cans. Ramona chose the trash cans. As the last children entered the building, she got down on her hands and knees and crawled into the space between the cans and the red brick wall. The second bell rang. "Hup 2, 3, 4, hup 2, 3, 4. The traffic boys were marching back from their posts at the intersections near the school. Ramona crouched motionless on the asphalt. "Hup 2, 3, 4. The traffic boys, heads up, eyes front, marched past the trash cans and into the building. The playground was quiet and Ramona was alone. Henry's dog Ribsy, who had followed the traffic boys as far as the door of the school, came over to check the odors of the trash cans. He put his nose down to the ground and whiffed around the cans, while Ramona crouched motionless with the rough asphalt digging into her knees. Ribsy's busy nose led him around the can face to face with Ramona. "Woof," said Ribsy. "Ribsy, go away," ordered Ramona in a whisper. "Roof." Ribsy knew Ramona was not supposed to be behind the trash cans. "You be quiet." Ramona's whisper was as ferocious as she could make it. Over in the kindergarten, the class began to sing the song about the Donzer. At least the strange woman knew that much about kindergarten. After the Donzer song, the kindergarten was quiet. Ramona wondered if the teacher knew that show and tell was supposed to come next. She strained her ears, but she could not hear any activity in the little building. The space between the brick wall and the trash cans began to feel as cold as a refrigerator to Ramona in her thin sweater. The asphalt dug into her knees, so she sat down with her feet straight out towards Ribsy's nose. The minutes dragged by. Except for Ribsy, Ramona was lonely. She leaned against the chilly red bricks and felt sorry for herself. Poor little Ramona all alone except for Ribsy behind the trash cans. Miss Binny would be sorry if she knew what she had made Ramona do. She would be sorry if she knew how cold and lonesome Ramona was. Ramona felt so sorry for the poor shivering little child behind the trash cans that one tear and then another slid down her cheeks. She sniffed pitifully. Ribsy opened one eye and looked at her before he closed it again. Not even Henry's dog cared what happened to her. After a while, Ramona heard the kindergarten running and laughing outside. How disloyal everyone was to have so much fun when Miss Binny had deserted her class. Ramona wondered if the kindergarten missed her and if anyone else would chase Davy and try to kiss him. Then Ramona must have dozed off, because the next thing she knew, recess time had come and the playground was swarming with shouting, yelling, ball-throwing older boys and girls. Ribsy was gone. Stiff with cold, Ramona hunched down as low as she could. A ball bounced with a bang against a trash can. Ramona shut her eyes and hoped that if she could not see anyone, no one could see her. Footsteps came running toward the ball. "Hey!" exclaimed a boy's voice. "There's a little kid hiding back here." Ramona's eyes flew open. "Go away," she said fiercely to the strange boy who was peering over the cans at her. "What are you hiding back there for?" asked the boy. "Go away," ordered Ramona. "Hey, Huggins," yelled the boy. "There's a little kid back here who lives over near you." In a moment, Henry was peering over the trash cans at Ramona. "What are you doing there?" he demanded. "You're supposed to be in kindergarten." "You mind your own business," said Ramona. Naturally, when two boys peered behind the trash cans, practically the whole school had to join them to see what was so interesting. "What's she doing?" people asked. "How come she's hiding? Does her teacher know she's here?" In the midst of all that excitement, Ramona felt a new discomfort. "Find her sister," someone said. "Get Beatrice. She'll know what to do." No one had to find Beezus. She was already there. "Ramona Geraldine Quimby," she said, "you come out of there this minute." "I won't," said Ramona, even though she knew she could not stay there much longer. "Ramona, you just wait until Mother hears about this," stormed Beezus. "You're really going to catch it." Ramona knew that Beezus was right, but catching it from her mother was not what was worrying her at the moment. "Here comes the yard teacher," someone said. Ramona had to admit defeat. She got to her hands and knees and then to her feet and faced the crowd across trash can lids as the yard teacher came to investigate the commotion. "Don't you belong in kindergarten?" the yard teacher asked. "I'm not going to kindergarten," said Ramona stubbornly, and cast an anguished glance at Beezus. "She's supposed to be in kindergarten," said Beezus, "but she needs to go to the bathroom." The older boys and girls thought this remark was funny, which made Ramona so angry she wanted to cry. There was nothing funny about it at all, and if she didn't hurry... The yard teacher turned to Beezus. "Take her to the bathroom and then to the principal's office. She'll find out what the trouble is." The first words were relief to Ramona, but the second a shock. No one in the morning kindergarten had ever been sent to Miss Mullen's office in the big building, except to deliver a note from Miss Binny, and then the children went in pairs because the errand was such a scary one. "What will the principal do to me?" Ramona asked as Beezus led her away to the girls' bathroom in the big building. "I don't know," said Beezus. "Talk to you, I guess, or call Mother." "Ramona, why did you have to go and do a dumb thing like hiding behind the trash cans?" "Because." Ramona was cross since Beezus was so cross. When the girls came out of the bathroom, Ramona reluctantly allowed herself to be led into the principal's office, where she felt small and frightened even though she tried not to show it. "This is my little sister Ramona," Beezus explained to Miss Mullen's secretary in the outer office. "This is my little sister Ramona," Beezus explained to Miss Mullen's secretary in the outer office. "She belongs in kindergarten. She's been hiding behind the trash cans." Miss Mullen must have overheard because she came out of her office. Frightened though she was, Ramona braced herself to say, "I won't go back to kindergarten." "Why, hello, Ramona," said Miss Mullen. "That's all right, Beatrice. You may go back to class. I'll take over." Ramona wanted to stay close to her sister, but Beezus walked out of the office, leaving her alone with the principal, the most important person in the whole school. Ramona felt small and pitiful, with her knees still marked where the asphalt had gouged her. Miss Mullen smiled as if Ramona's behavior was of no particular importance and said, "Isn't it too bad Miss Binny had to stay home with a sore throat? I know what a surprise it was for you to find a strange teacher in your kindergarten room." Ramona wondered how Miss Mullen knew so much. The principal did not even bother to ask what Ramona was doing behind the trash cans. She did not feel the least bit sorry for the poor little girl with the gouged knees. She simply took Ramona by the hand and said, "I'm going to introduce you to Mrs. Wilcox. I know you're going to like her," and started out the door. Ramona felt a little indignant because Miss Mullen did not demand to know why she had been hiding all that time. Miss Mullen did not even notice how forlorn and tear-stained Ramona looked. Ramona had been so cold and lonely and miserable that she thought Miss Mullen should show some interest. She had half expected the principal to say, "Why, you poor little thing, why were you hiding behind the trash can?" The looks on the faces of the morning kindergarten when Ramona walked into the room with the principal made up for Miss Mullen's lack of concern. Round eyes, open mouths, faces blank with surprise. Ramona was delighted to see the whole class staring at her from their seats. They were worried about her. They cared what had happened to her. "Ramona, this is Miss Binney's substitute, Mrs. Wilcox," said Miss Mullen. To the substitute, she said, "Ramona is a little late this morning. That was all." Not a word about how cold and miserable Ramona had been. Not a word about how brave she had been to hide until recess. "I'm glad you're here, Ramona," said Mrs. Wilcox as the principal left. "The class is drawing with crayons. What would you like to draw?" Here it was seat work time, and Mrs. Wilcox was not even having the class do real seat work. But she was letting them draw pictures as if this day were the first day of kindergarten. Ramona was most disapproving. Things were not supposed to be this way. She looked at Howie scrubbing away with a blue crayon to make a sky across the top of his paper, and Davy, who was drawing a man whose arms seemed to come out of his ears. But they were busy and happy drawing whatever they pleased. "I would like to make cues," said Ramona on sudden inspiration. "Make use of what?" said Mrs. Wilcox, holding out a sheet of drawing paper. Ramona had been sure all along that the substitute could not be as smart as Miss Binney, but at least she expected her to know what the letter Q was. All grown-ups were supposed to know Q. "Nothing," Ramona said as she accepted the paper and, pleasantly self-conscious under the awed stares of the kindergarten, went to her seat. At last Ramona was free to draw her Q her own way. Forgetting the loneliness and discomfort of the morning, she drew a most satisfying row of Q's, Ramona style, and decided that having a substitute teacher was not so bad after all. Mrs. Wilcox wandered up and down the aisle, looking at pictures. "Why, Ramona," she said, pausing by Ramona's desk. "What charming little cats you've drawn. Do you have kittens at home?" Ramona felt sorry for poor Mrs. Wilcox, a grown-up lady teacher who did not know Q. "No," she answered, "our cat is a boy cat." Chapter 5. Ramona's Engagement Ring. "No," said Ramona on the first rainy morning after she had started kindergarten. "Yes," said Mrs. Quimby. "No," said Ramona, "I won't." "Ramona, be sensible," said Mrs. Quimby. "I don't want to be sensible," said Ramona. "I hate being sensible." "Now, Ramona," said her mother, and Ramona knew she was about to be reasoned with. "You have a new raincoat. Boots cost money, and Howie's old boots are perfectly good. The soles are scarcely worn." "The tops aren't shiny," Ramona told her mother, "and they're brown boots. Brown boots are for boys." "They'll keep your feet dry," said Mrs. Quimby, "and that is what boots are for." Ramona realized she looked sulky, but she could not help herself. Only grown-ups would say boots were for keeping feet dry. Anyone in kindergarten knew that a girl should wear shiny red or white boots on the first rainy day. Not to keep her feet dry, but to show off. That's what boots were for, showing off, wading, splashing, stamping. "Ramona," said Mrs. Quimby sternly, "get that look off your face this instant. Either you wear these boots or you stay home from school." Ramona recognized that her mother meant what she said, and so, because she loved kindergarten, she sat down on the floor and dragged on the hated brown boots, which did not go with her new flowered plastic raincoat and hat. Howie arrived in a yellow slicker that was long enough for him to grow into for at least 2 years, and a yellow rain hat that almost hid his face. Beneath the raincoat, Ramona glimpsed a pair of shiny brown boots, which she supposed she would have to wear someday when they were old and dull and dirty. "Those are my old boots," said Howie, looking at Ramona's feet as they started off to school. "You better not tell anybody." Ramona plodded along, on feet almost too heavy to lift. It was a perfect morning for anyone with new boots. Enough rain had fallen in the night to fill gutters with muddy streams and to bring worms squirming out of the lawns onto the sidewalks. The intersection by the school was unusually quiet that morning because rain had halted construction on the new market. Ramona was so downhearted that she did not even tease Henry Huggins when he led her across the street. The kindergarten playground, as she had expected, was swarming with boys and girls in raincoats, most of them too big, and boots, most of them new. The girls wore various sorts of raincoats and red or white boots, all except Susan, who carried her new white boots so she would not get them muddy. The boys looked alike because they all wore yellow raincoats and hats and brown boots. Ramona was not even sure which boy was Davy. Not that he mattered to her this morning. Her feet felt too heavy for chasing anyone. Part of the class had lined up properly by the door, waiting for Miss Binney, while the rest ran about clumping, splashing, and stamping. "Those are boys' boots you're wearing," said Susan to Ramona. Ramona did not answer. Instead, she picked up a smooth pink worm that lay wiggling on the playground and, without really thinking, wound it around her finger. "Look," yelled Davy from beneath his big rain hat. "Ramona's wearing a ring made out of a worm." Ramona had not thought of the worm as a ring until now, but she saw at once that the idea was interesting. "See my ring," she shouted, thrusting her fist toward the nearest base. Boots were temporarily forgotten. Everyone ran screaming from Ramona to avoid being shown her ring. See my ring," shouted Ramona, racing around the playground on feet that were suddenly much lighter. When Miss Binney appeared around the corner, the class scrambled to line up by the door. "Miss Binney, Miss Binney." Everyone wanted to be the first to tell. "Ramona is wearing a worm for a ring." "It's a pink worm," said Ramona, thrusting out her hand. "Not an old dead white worm." "Oh, what a pretty worm," said Miss Binney bravely. "It's so smooth and pink." Ramona elaborated. "It's my engagement ring." "Who are you engaged to?" asked Anne. "I haven't decided," answered Ramona. "Not me," Davy piped up. "Not me," said Howie. "Not me," said Eric R. "Well, Ramona," Miss Binney was searching for words, "I don't think you should wear your ring during kindergarten. Why don't you put it down on the playground in a puddle so that it will stay fresh?" Ramona was happy to do anything Miss Binney wanted her to. She unwound the worm from her finger and placed it carefully in a puddle where it lay limp and still. After that, Ramona raced around the playground with a worm around her finger whenever her mother made her wear Howie's old boots to school. And when everyone asked who she was engaged to, she'd always answered, "I haven't decided." "Not me," Davy always said, followed by Howie, Eric R., and any other boy who happened to be near. Then one Saturday, Mrs. Quimby examined Ramona's scuffed shoes and decided that not only were the heels worn down, the leather of the toes was worn through, because Ramona stopped her lopsided two-wheeled tricycle by dragging her toes on the concrete. Mrs. Quimby had Ramona stand up while she felt her feet through the leather. "It's time for new shoes," Mrs. Quimby decided. "Get your jacket and your boots. We'll drive down to the shopping center." "It isn't raining today," said Ramona. "Why do I have to take boots?" "To see if they will fit over your new shoes," answered her mother. "Hurry along, Ramona." When they reached the shoe store, Ramona's favorite shoe salesman said, as Ramona and her mother sat down, "What's the matter with my little Petunia today? Don't you have a smile for me?" Ramona shook her head and looked sadly and longingly at a row of beautiful, shiny girls' boots displayed on one side of the store. There she sat with Howie's dingy old brown boots beside her. How could she smile? A babyish nursery school girl who was wearing new red boots was rocking joyously on the shoe store's rocking horse, while her mother paid for her boots. "Well, we'll see what we can do for you," said the salesman briskly as he pulled off Ramona's shoes and made her stand with her foot on the measuring stick. Finding the right pair of Oxfords for her did not take him long. "Now try on the boots," said Mrs. Quimby in her no-nonsense voice, when Ramona had walked across the shoe store and back in her new shoes. For a moment, as Ramona sat down on the floor and grasped one of the hated boots, she considered pretending she could not get it on. However, she knew she could not get away with this trick, because the shoe store man understood both children and shoes. She pulled and yanked and tugged, and managed to get her foot most of the way in. When she stood up, she was on tiptoe inside her boot. Her mother tugged some more, and her shoe went all the way into the boot. "There," said Mrs. Quimby. Ramona sighed. The babyish nursery school girl stopped rocking long enough to announce to the world, "I have new boots." "Tell me, Petunia," said the shoeman, "how many boys and girls in kindergarten?" 29, said Ramona with a long face. 29, most of them with new boots. The happy-booted nursery school baby climbed off the rocking horse, collected her free balloon, and left with her mother. The shoeman spoke to Mrs. Quimby. "Kindergarten teachers like boots to fit loosely, so children can manage by themselves. I doubt if Petunia's teacher has time to help with 58 boots." "I hadn't thought of that," said Mrs. Quimby. "Perhaps we better look at boots after all." "I'll bet Petunia here would like red boots," said the shoeman. When Ramona beamed, he added, "I had a hunch that would get a smile out of you." When Ramona left the shoe store with her beautiful red boots, girls' boots, in a box, which she carried herself, she was so filled with joy she set her balloon free just to watch it sail over the parking lot and up into the sky until it was a tiny red dot against the gray clouds. The stiff soles of her new shoes made such a pleasant noise on the pavement that she began to prance. She was a pony. No, she was one of the 3 billy goats Gruff, the littlest one, trip-trapping over the bridge that the troll was hiding under. Ramona trip-trapped joyfully all the way to the parked car, and when she reached home, she trip-trapped up and down the hall and all around the house. "For goodness sake, Ramona," said Mrs. Quimby, while she was marking Ramona's name in the new boots, "can't you just walk?" "Not when I'm the littlest billy goat Gruff," answered Ramona, and trip-trapped down the hall to her room. Unfortunately, there was no rain the next morning, so Ramona left her new boots at home and trip-trapped to school, where she did not have much chance of catching Davy, because he could run faster than she could trip-trap in her stiff new shoes. She trip-trapped to her seat, and later, because she was art monitor who got to pass out drawing paper, she trip-trapped to the supply cupboard and trip-trapped up and down the aisles passing out paper. "Ramona, I would like it if you walked quietly," said Miss Binny. "I am the littlest billy goat Gruff," explained Ramona. "I have to trip-trap." "You may trip-trap when we go outdoors." Mrs. Binny's voice was firm. "You may not trip-trap in the classroom." At playtime, the whole class turned into billy goats Gruff and trip-trapped around the playground, but none so joyfully or so noisily as Ramona. The gathering clouds, Ramona noticed, were dark and threatening. Sure enough, that evening rain began to fall, and all night long it beat against the south side of the Quimby's house. The next morning, Ramona, in her boots and raincoat, was out long before Howie arrived to walk to school with her. She waded through the wet lawn, and her boots became even shinier when they were wet. She stamped in all the little puddles on the driveway. She stood in the gutter and let muddy water run over the toes of her beautiful new boots. She gathered wet leaves to dam the gutter so she could stand in deeper water. Howie, as she might have expected, was used to his boots and not a bit excited. He did enjoy stamping in puddles, however, and together they stamped and splashed on the way to school. Ramona came to a halt at the intersection, guarded by Henry Huggins in his yellow slicker, rain hat, and brown boots. "Look at all that nice mud," she said, pointing to the area that was to be the parking lot for the new market. It was such a nice mud, rich and brown, with puddles and little rivers in the tire tracks left by construction trucks. It was the best mud, the muddiest mud, and the most tempting mud Ramona had ever seen. Best of all, the day was so rainy there were no construction workers around to tell anyone to stay out of the mud. "Come on, Howie," said Ramona. "I'm going to see how my boots work in the mud." Of course she would get her shiny boots muddy. Then she could have the fun of turning the hose on them that afternoon after kindergarten. Howie was already following Henry across the street. When Henry executed his sharp about-face on the opposite curb, he saw that Ramona had been left behind. "You were supposed to cross with me," he told her. "Now you have to wait until some more kids come." "I don't care," said Ramona happily, and marched off to the muddy mud. "Ramona, you come back here," yelled Henry. "You're going to get in trouble." "Traffic boys aren't supposed to talk on duty," Ramona reminded him, and marched straight into the mud. Surprisingly, her feet started to slide out from under her. She had not realized that mud was so slippery. Managing to regain her balance, she set each boot down slowly and carefully before she pulled her other boot from the sucking mud. She waved happily to Henry, who seemed to be going through some sort of struggle within himself. He kept opening his mouth as if he wanted to say something, and then closing it again. Ramona also waved at the members of the morning kindergarten who were watching her through the playground fence. More mud clung to her boots with each step. "Look at my elephant feet," she called out. Her boots were becoming heavier and heavier. Henry gave up his struggle. "You're going to get stuck," he yelled. "No, I'm not," insisted Ramona, and discovered she was unable to raise her right boot. She tried to raise her left boot, but it was stuck fast. She grasped the top of one of her boots with both hands and tried to lift her foot, but she could not budge it. She tried to lift the other foot, but she could not budge it either. Henry was right. Miss Binny was not going to like what had happened, but Ramona was stuck. "I told you so," yelled Henry against the traffic rules. Ramona was becoming warmer and warmer inside her raincoat. She pulled and lifted. She could raise her feet one at a time inside her boots, but no matter how she tugged and yanked with her hands, she could not lift her precious boots from the mud. Ramona grew warmer and warmer. She could never get out of this mud. Kindergarten would start without her, and she would be left all alone in the mud. Miss Binny would not like her being out here in the mud, when she was supposed to be inside singing the Donzer song and doing seat work. Ramona's chin began to quiver. "Look at Ramona! Look at Ramona!" shrieked the kindergarten as Miss Binny in a raincoat and with a plastic hood over her hair appeared on the playground. "Oh dear," Ramona heard Miss Binny say. Drivers of cars paused to stare and smile as tears mingled with the rain on Ramona's cheeks. Miss Binny came splashing across the street. "My goodness, Ramona, how are we going to get you out?" "I don't know," sobbed Ramona. Miss Binny could not get stuck in the mud, too. The morning kindergarten needed her. A man called out from the car. "What you need is a few boards." "Boards would only sink into the muck," said a passerby on the sidewalk. The first bell rang. Ramona sobbed harder. Now Miss Binny would have to go into school and leave her out here all alone in the mud and the rain and the cold. By now, some of the older boys and girls were staring at her from the windows of the big school. "Now don't worry, Ramona," said Miss Binny. "We'll get you out somehow." Ramona, who wanted to be helpful, knew what had happened when a car was stuck in the mud. "Could you call a tow truck?" she asked with a big sniff. She could see herself being yanked out of the mud by a heavy chain hooked on the collar of her raincoat. She found this picture so interesting that her sobs subsided, and she waited hopefully for Miss Binny's answer. The second bell rang. Miss Binny was not looking at Ramona. She was looking thoughtfully at Henry Huggins, who seemed to be staring at something way off in the distance. The traffic sergeant blew his whistle, summoning the traffic boys to return from their posts to school. "Boy," Miss Binny called out. "Traffic boy." "Who, me?" asked Henry, even though he was the only traffic boy stationed at that intersection. "That's Henry Huggins," said helpful Ramona. "Henry, come here, please," said Miss Binny. "I'm supposed to go in when the whistle blows," said Henry, and he glanced up at the boys and girls who were watching from the big brick building. "But this is an emergency," Miss Binny pointed out. "You have boots on, and I need your help in getting this little girl out of the mud. I'll explain to the principal." Henry did not seem very enthusiastic as he splashed across the street, and when he came to the mud, he heaved a big sigh before he stepped into it. Carefully, he picked his way through the muck and the puddles to Ramona. "Now see what you got me into," he said crossly. "I told you to keep out of here." For once, Ramona had nothing to say. Henry was right. "I guess I'll have to carry you," he said, and his tone was grudging. "Hang on." He stooped and grasped Ramona around the waist, and she obediently put her arms around the wet collar of his raincoat. Henry was big and strong. Then, to Ramona's horror, she found herself being lifted right out of her beautiful new boots. "My boots," she wailed. "You're leaving my boots." Henry slipped, slid, and in spite of Ramona's weight, regained his balance. "You keep quiet," he ordered. "I'm getting you out of here, aren't I? Do you want us both to land in the mud?" Ramona hung on and said no more. Henry lurched and skidded through the mud to the sidewalk, where he set his burden down in front of Miss Binny. "Yay!" yelled some big boys who had opened a window. "Yay, Henry!" Henry scowled in their direction. "Thank you, Henry," said Miss Binny with real gratitude. As Henry tried to scrape the mud from his boots on the edge of the curb. "What do you say, Ramona?" "My boots," said Ramona. "He left my new boots in the mud." How lonely they looked, 2 bright spots of red in all that mud. She could not leave her boots behind, not when she had waited so long to get them. Somebody might take them, and she would have to go back to shoving her feet into Howie's ugly old boots. "Don't worry, Ramona," said Miss Binny, looking anxiously toward the rest of her morning kindergarten, growing wetter by the minute as they watched through the fence. "Nobody is going to take your boots on a day like this. We'll get them back when it stops raining and the ground dries off." "But they'll fill up with rain without my feet in them," protested Ramona. "The rain will spoil them." Miss Binny was sympathetic but firm. "I know how you feel, but I'm afraid there isn't anything we can do about it." Miss Binny's words were too much for Ramona. After all the times she had been forced to wear Howie's ugly old brown boots, she could not leave her beautiful new red boots out in the mud to fill up with rainwater. "I want my boots," she howled and began to cry again. "Oh, all right," said Henry crossly. "I'll get your old boots. Don't start crying again." And heaving another gusty sigh, he waded back out into the empty lot, yanked the boots out of the mud, and waded back to the sidewalk, where he dropped them at Ramona's feet. "There," he said, looking at the mud-covered objects with dislike. Ramona expected him to add, "I hope you're satisfied," but he did not. He just started across the street to school. "Thank you, Henry," Ramona called after him without being reminded. There was something very special about being rescued by a big, strong traffic boy in a yellow slicker. Miss Binny picked up the muddy boots and said, "What beautiful red boots. We'll wash off the mud in the sink and they'll be as good as new. Now we must hurry back to the kindergarten." Ramona smiled at Miss Binny, who was again, she decided, the nicest, most understanding teacher in the world. Not once had Miss Binny scolded or made any tiresome remarks about why on earth did Ramona have to do such a thing. Not once had Miss Binny said she should know better. Then something on the sidewalk caught Ramona's eye. It was a pink worm that still had some wiggle left in it. She picked it up and wound it around her finger, and she looked toward Henry. "I'm going to marry you, Henry Huggins," she called out. Even though traffic boys were supposed to stand up straight, Henry seemed to hunch down inside his raincoat as if he were trying to disappear. "I've got an engagement ring and I'm going to marry you," yelled Ramona after Henry, as the morning kindergarten laughed and cheered. "Yay, Henry," yelled the big boys before their teacher shut the window. As she followed Miss Binny across the street, Ramona heard Davy's joyful shout, "Boy, I'm glad it isn't me."